Hello, all you amazing women, and welcome to How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess. With me, Amanda Ryder, nutritionist and author. Now, I call this podcast How to Feel Like a Midlife Goddess because, let's face it, so many of us don't feel like shining in midlife. We can be grappling with physical and psychological symptoms, which can lead to a real loss of confidence, and it can feel like you're really losing your identity. However, I believe it's possible for us all to feel good at this time of our lives. So each week, I'm going to be sharing with you my best nutrition and lifestyle advice, as well as interviewing expert speakers. And week by week, together, we will build upon a foundation of healthy, sustainable habits that will really benefit us and make all the difference to how we feel. So stay tuned, because this is your recipe for thriving at midlife and bringing out your inner goddess. Hello, how are you doing? So today it's just me, so I hope it doesn't get too boring. I'll try and keep it entertaining. But I wanted to talk to you about, what is healthy eating in 2025? Because let's face it, a lot has changed in the last decade, and in the last 5 years, the sort of health space evolves, doesn't it? And our understanding of nutrition and health just keeps getting better and better. So I kind of wanted to dispel some myths that a lot of us live by still, and instill some really healthy habits and give you some ideas that you can use in your everyday life to improve your nutrition. Because, let's face it, one of the main things that you can do for your health is to eat well. And it makes such a difference. And I see that with the clients that I work with every day. So I want to share with you, what you can do, practical tips, and maybe if there's some legacy of advice that's no longer serving you, I hope I cover that as well. But this is kind of like part one. I've written quite a lot about this subject. So yeah, let's get started. So first off, why do we want to eat well? I always think about that. What is your why? I mean, yeah, we want to eat well, but we, it's a lot of effort. So you want to do it, in my mind, because perhaps you're in a better mood. And this is certainly what I see in my clients, and certainly what I see in myself. Isn't it wonderful when you've got a stable mood and you feel happy and content, or just not as triggered? Most of us want to have more energy, or good energy. And again, without energy, what can you do in life? And if you've got good physical and mental energy, it just feels amazing. Most of us want to have a healthy weight. And by that, I don't mean like stick thin, but just a good weight that feels right to us, where we feel maybe at our best. And then we also want to have a robust immunity. And when we talk about immunity, a lot of people think, your immune system, it's fighting off infection. But it's so much more than that. Our immune system kind of keeps us stable, prevents disease. It's really important that we have a stable immunity that's, is not triggered by everything, but at the same time is triggered when it's necessary. So I don't know if you've heard of Peter Attia. He has a very successful podcast called The Drive and various books, but he talks about the 4 horsemen, and, the 4 horsemen that kind of get most of us, what most of us are going to end up getting in hopefully in later life. I say hopefully, we don't get it earlier, we get it when we're really old. But these are heart disease. Most of us get, our pipes, our blood vessels, our arteries kind of get blocked up as we get older. And, a lot of us will suffer with heart disease. So that's one thing we want to prevent. The next one is diabetes. There's a lot of sugar in the diet these days. And yeah, it's very easy to overconsume, isn't it? But diabetes is a problem that a lot of us get as we get older. So we want to avoid that one. We want to avoid cancer. We all know someone who's had cancer. Maybe we've had cancer ourselves. We want to lower our risk as much as we possibly can. And then the 4th thing, or the 4th horseman that comes from most of us, is like neurodegenerative diseases. So by that, I mean like dementia and Alzheimer's. And whilst diet isn't going to prevent us getting all of these, it's going to lower our risk. But I think it's a really good idea if you can, if you're lucky enough to be able to get your genes tested, then you can kind of find out what you're predisposed to, but also just by looking at your family history, your parents, your grandparents, what did they have? Did they have heart disease? My mum and my grandmother both had breast cancer. So I'm very, alert to that. And I try and do things in my diet, like eat less sugar and drink less alcohol, things that I know will definitely lower my risk. They don't give me any guarantees, but I know that's an area I really need to focus on. Whereas we don't have so much dementia and Alzheimer's in our family. So I think it's really good to think about that. Do you have heart disease, diabetes, cancer, these neurodegenerative diseases in your family? And then think about what risk factors you can actually work on. Because that's all you can do really, isn't it? Lower your risk. And then sometimes that's just, that's enough. So what we do in our 30s, 40s and 50s really sets us up for success in our 60s, 70s and 80s. So let's start by dispelling some myths. So one of the myths that has sort of stayed with me throughout my life, and I was a teenager in the 80s. That was, calories in equals calories out. If you're taking 2,000 calories a day, then you need to be expending that many calories in energy. And a lot of us live by that and low calorie diets. But we now know that is not the case. And it's much more about the messages that your body gets from the foods that you eat. Now, if we think about obesity in 1975, 6% of the population was obese. And if you've listened to my Japanese podcast, you'll know that, in Japan, I think it's like 4 to 5% still to this day. However, in 2025, we're now dealing with an obesity rate of 26%. We are living basically in an obesogenic society, meaning that there is so much processed food around us that it can be really hard to achieve a normal weight because these foods get us over consuming. So I really wanted to look at that. But if you're still one of those people that thinks, a low calorie diet is where it's at and doing lots of exercise at the gym and you're going to get slim, it just doesn't work like that. It's more about, the foods that you eat and the messages that they give your body. So going back to the low calories, if we just had a low calorie diet, and I've talked about this before, but say you have 2,000 calories a day and then you say, okay, I want to lose loads of weight, so I go down to 1,000 calories a day, and you do that for 6 months. If you kept losing weight at the same rate, eventually you would disappear. And the body's clever in that. So what it does, it slows down how quickly you process food and the calories that you retain. And you basically get a lower metabolism, you lose muscle mass, and before you know it, you eat normally again, back to 2,000 calories, and you gain the weight back that you lost, plus. And that's what we call yo-yo dieting. And it's really quite destabilizing for your body to do that. But it's more important, like I said, it's more important. The messages that our brain gets from the foods that we eat is the key factor in being healthy. So I want you to ask yourself, are you an ultra processed person? You might have heard of the book written by Chris Van Tulleken, Ultra Processed People. And if you haven't and you're not convinced about processed food, then do, pick it up and have a read. It's it's really eye-opening and exposes the top 10 companies in the world that produce all this ultra processed food that keeps us overeating. So consider this, that 60% of our diet comes from ultra processed food, and that when we eat ultra processed food, we consume 500 calories more a day just because it encourages us to overeat. And that's because it overrides our satiety mechanism. So the brain doesn't get the message that we've had enough food. The brain thinks basically that your petrol tank is empty. And in fact, it's not empty at all, it's full, but you just don't get that message. And we can become so attached to these foods that we almost identify with them, like don't take away my, TV dinner or my Mars bar or, my favorite biscuit or my favorite crisp, because, we feel like, they're part of our identity. But I think it's really good to step back and think, well, why is it? And what I've come to realize about myself is that I've actually been manipulated to overeat these foods. They've got lots of refined sugar and unhealthy fats and salt and chemicals. They help you kind of like reach this bliss point where it tastes so good that while you've got it in your mouth, you're already thinking about the next handful rather than enjoying the food, because it's just, that addictive. And when you think that, there's probably like 10 companies worldwide that make all this processed food, and they employ scientists to help, these foods become hyper palatable and help us reach this bliss point. It's no wonder that we become addicted to these foods and we overconsume them. We just don't get that message. What is the definition of an ultra processed food? You'll hear them described as UPFs. Well, basically, they are foods that undergo industrial processes. They're made in a factory with big machines, things like hydrogenation and molding, and they contain additives like dyes and stabilizers, flavor enhancers, emulsifiers. You'll often see those on the, when you read the ingredients, and things like defoaming agents. There's also kind of like lots of enzymes in breads that kind of help, stop the food from going off. So not only are they produced to last for a long time, sometimes literally years, but they're also produced to help us to, encourage us to overconsume. And these foods are really damaging to human health. They raise our blood sugar. Our body doesn't recognize them as real foods. They have a lot of salt. They have a lot of unnatural fats. And we know that people that eat ultra-processed foods are unhealthier than people that have more natural diets. There's just no question. But I think what the problem with most of us don't realize that the amount of food out there that's ultra processed is massive, and it's really easy to have 60% of it as your diet. And once we're overweight, and you probably know this yourself, it's very hard to lose weight. And it's not like you just carry on and maintain a healthy diet. You've got to do something extra. You've got to do something radical to, produce a change. And that's why the drugs, like Ozempic and Wegovy and Mounjaro are so popular, these weight loss drugs that are taking the world by storm. And in fact, I read that in the UK, 1 in 10 women is taking one of these drugs because it's so hard to lose weight. And I'm not judging at all. If you're taking one of these drugs and it's helping you to lose weight, then that's great. Being obese isn't healthy, and actually taking one of these drugs is going to help you to lose weight. But it's important, if you are taking one of these drugs, that you maintain your muscle mass, because what I'm seeing is that people are taking it, they are not eating, they don't have an appetite, and that's because those drugs, they work on our satiety centers and they tell us we're not hungry, and then it's much easier to lose weight. And that is one of the mechanisms of these drugs. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but you can see it's the message, and we can do this by food. We can get those satiety messages in the brain going by eating the right foods, but a lot of us don't do that because we live in this obesogenic society where we're encouraged to eat all the wrong things. And I think something like 98% of advertising foods is for processed foods, like ultra processed foods, and 2% is for natural foods. It's like, don't blame yourself. It's no wonder we're all over consuming these processed foods. Anyway, so where do most of us go wrong? Well, it's things like, energy bars. I used to think an energy bar was good, and if it said it had extra protein, all the better. But that isn't. It's an ultra processed food. If you look at the ingredients, there'll be a long list of ingredients, and the protein will be some, man-made something made with soya, but it's gone through so many different processes to get it into this energy bar. It's not real food. Even granola, not all granola, some are natural, but, ones with a long list of ingredients. Packaged bread, like brown bread, even in a package, or in a packet, it's ultra processed. Again, look at the ingredients. There'll be words on there you can't pronounce, and there'll be chemicals and enzymes and preservatives that you really don't want in your body. Soft drinks account for 18% of the calories that we take in the UK, and 54% of the sugar that we consume. So, soft drinks really creeps into most of our diets and is ultimately quite bad for us. So if, be careful about your soft drinks. And also crisps, they are an ultra processed food. Biscuits, TV dinners, frozen pizzas, spreads, even things like chocolate spread, that is an ultra-processed food. And, I kind of think of all of this stuff as being like low-grade snacking. You just go to your cupboard, pull out of a packet, and, it kind of satisfies your appetite for an hour or two, but really, generally isn't doing any good in the long run. So if it has a lot of ingredients that you don't recognize, then you can pretty confidently say that that is an ultra-processed foods. So, oh my God, we've got these powerful companies and they're very clever scientists, manipulating us. What can we do to sort of overcome it? Well, of course, the first thing is recognizing it. So it's generally got low fiber. It's generally got no relation to the original food. It's got lots of additives. It's got lots of sweeteners. It's got emulsifiers. If you think of what an emulsifier does, it basically brings fat and water together, because normally if you had a glass of water and you poured in some olive oil, it just separates. But emulsifiers pull it together, so you get this nice emulsion. But you do not want foods getting into your gut that are emulsified. If you think about what we've got in our gut, we do not want fats and water all kind of gumming up together. Not good for our guts. And again, we all now know, unless you've been under a sort of nutrition blocking stone, we know that the gut health is so important to our overall health. And another way of recognizing an ultra-processed food is they often say it's got added protein. And again, if you look what that protein is, it isn't like, it's a chicken breast or some fish or some chickpeas. It's something that's been manipulated, like a soy isolate or something like that. So these are my tips to you to help you eat more natural foods without like a massive effort at breakfast, lunch and dinner. Because most of us are busy. We want to eat well, but we don't want to dedicate our lives to it. And I kind of get that. And I know how it is when you've got like half an hour between meetings at lunchtime. And if there isn't something like relatively healthy to pull out the fridge, you're going to go for a piece of toast, some biscuits. We've all done it. A bowl of cereal for lunch. We've all kind of succumbed to that, haven't we? So I would say the way to start inching out the processed food out of your diet, and it can't be done overnight. It's taken me a long time, but this is one of the factors that I've realized is so important, and that is planning. So I would say to you, plan when it comes to your food. Now, the way I approach this is I have a vegetable box delivered once a week where I have all my vegetables delivered. I use Riverford. There are lots of companies out there, or even supermarkets, but I have my vegetables and my chicken and my fish kind of delivered on a Monday. And then what I try and do is that evening is to roast off some vegetables. I might poach some chicken. I might poach 3 or 4 chicken breasts at a time. And poaching chicken's really easy. You just don't want to overdo it, but you basically put the chicken in a pan, pour some water over. It could be chicken stock. You could throw a bay leaf in there, some garlic, maybe some herbs, but you just want the water or the stock to be about an inch over the chicken. You bring it to the boil very, very gently, and then you simmer it for like 10 minutes, 10, 12, minutes. You don't want to overdo it. If you overdo it, it becomes very rubbery. If you get it just at the right moment, you've got this lovely tender chicken, and then you can slice it up and have that in your fridge ready to go. I also stir fry some tofu, and I get 2 or 3 punnets of mushrooms and I stir fry those. But you can see where I'm coming from. I'm getting these roasted vegetables, I'm roasting them, and then putting them in glass bowls. You don't want to be using plastic like Tupperware anymore. Glass is where it's at, or ceramic. And I have them in my fridge. I've got some poached chicken. I might have some stir-fried tofu. So on those days when I'm really rushed, I can always find something in my fridge that I can just pull out, and it's not cooking, it's just assembling something on a plate. So if you can, and a lot of my clients prefer to do it on a Sunday, but just having a day a week where you get a big old roasting tin and you slice up whatever vegetables you've got and you just roast them gently for like 30-40 minutes, depending what they are and how dense they are, and then putting them in individual bowls. And that way you're protecting yourself from those hunger pangs and going for something, processed. So get the good stuff in. Always have, nuts and seeds in your cupboard. I have I've invested in beautiful jars. They look really lovely. They've got like wooden lids, and I open my cupboard and they all look gorgeous. And you know how it is when you go to, to a cafe and they've got a cake stand and there's like loads of cakes. There's something to do with abundance. I think humans just like abundance. If you see like, a whole counter full of cakes, you're more likely to have one. Well, I'm trying to do that with nuts in my kitchen. I have my cashew nuts, my pistachio nuts, my almonds, my pecans, my pumpkin seeds, my sunflower seeds, all in glasses, all as full as I can possibly make them. And then when I open the cupboard and I want a snack, I'm looking, at this abundance of nuts and seeds, and I can just grab a handful. I always make sure I've got berries in. It doesn't have to be blueberries. It can be raspberries. It's really good to, buy frozen berries, because then you've always got them and you can just take them out the night before, leave them on the countertop, and they'll be defrosted by the morning. You can keep a big bowl in your fridge, whatever does it for you. But buying frozen berries is more economical, and it means you've always got them, and there's no problem whatsoever with fruit and vegetables being frozen, and often they retain more of the nutrients than they would if you buy them. And we've all done that, haven't we? Like bought some blueberries and they're in the fridge for 2 days and they go moldy, and they're not cheap, let's face it. So frozen is really good. Also get yourself like avocados and eggs in. I mean, that's such an easy thing, having some avocado and some eggs on some lovely sourdough or some seeded bread. I'm not keen on packet bread, but, the right breads can be, part of a sort of healthy diet. Also things like hummus. I like to make my own hummus, but buying hummus is, is fine. And then having it with, carrot or celery or tomatoes. Again, that can be a lunch with a couple of crackers, can't it, on a busy day? But that is just keeping you from having this processed food that's coming out of a packet. So getting your kitchen kind of stocked up with good stuff is where it's at. And I also think, if you can cook once and eat 2 to 3 times from that cooking session, brilliant. We want to make it as easy as we possibly can. And, cooking once, eating once is just so time consuming. So if I'm making something like a chili, if you've got my book, Feel Good for Menopause, I've got like the 2-bean or the 3-bean chili. And actually it's much better if you make it one day and you have it the next. It's much better. It's kind of absorbed all the lovely chili and all the flavors. But, I will cook up a big pot of that, and I will probably get 3 or 4 portions of that. We'll eat some of it for dinner, 3 or 4 portions, 2 will go in the freezer and 2 will go for the next day. And then, when I'm stuck, I've always got some of my lovely 2 or 3 bean chili. It's really good to have some protein as well that's ready to go. I think you probably heard me talk about this before, but having protein or a savoury breakfast is really helpful, because when you don't have protein for breakfast, you tend to get hungrier throughout the day, and your blood sugar balance is a bit off when you don't have as much protein for breakfast. So if you can, and I've talked about this as a podcast I did, a Feel Good For, have a listen to that if you haven't already, but some of the ideas about getting enough protein at breakfast can really help you have a stable blood sugar. And again, if you've worked with me or you've listened to previous podcasts, you'll know that if you've got a stable blood sugar, you're less likely to succumb to processed foods or get those really sort of desperate hunger pangs where you will eat anything. Another little hack that I really like, or a little device, is an Instant Pot. Don't know if you've heard of one of those. Maybe I'll put a picture of one on my Instagram. But it's basically like a pressure cooker and a slow cooker in one. And you can do things like rice in it. You can do porridge in it. You can do stews in it. I mean, it's just so versatile. And the thing I like about it, and this is, if you talk to any Japanese person, they will have a rice cooker. But, they like to eat a lot of rice. And I like rice, and if you just eat rice on your own, it's going to raise your blood sugar, but generally as part of your plate, I think it really has its place. And if you're cooking lots of foods, it's quite time consuming. And again, when you've had a busy day and you've been using your brain, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm cooking a meal in the evening, I don't want to talk, I just want to cook, and I don't want anything too complicated. I don't want to be reading complicated ingredient lists and, detailed methods on how to do it. I just want to press a few buttons, chop a few things and have something nice to eat at the end of it. And the thing with an Instant Pot is you can put your rice in there, your water in there, you put the lid on, press a button, and you don't have to do anything else. And it'll cooks in, like in a few minutes, and then you've got this lovely fluffy rice. So an Instant Pot can just be something, an added something that can just help you to make food a bit more easily. And rice is really nice. You can cook a lot of rice and put it in the fridge and have it the next day. So rice is a nice natural food. And again, it's better than having biscuits or processed bread. And it is a carbohydrate and it will get turned into sugar quite quickly in your bloodstream. However, if you're having it with protein and fats and what I talk about the feel good for, that's not going to happen so much. And people often ask me about air fryers. And I always say, no, I hate air fryers. Oh my God, I hate them. They're like full of chemicals. I don't know what kind of lining they've got on them, but yeah, they don't look like a healthy piece of kit to me. I haven't done a deep dive on them, but I did have a quick look when they first came out and clients were asking me about them. And I feel slower cooking with less chemicals is much better. Anyway, what else can we do to avoid these ultra processed foods? Well, this is something I've been doing. No crisps at home. Crisps are, it's like I said earlier, one of those foods that you take a mouthful and you're not even enjoying the mouthful because if you're like me, I'm already thinking about getting the next mouthful and getting the crisps in my hand to shove it in my mouth as quickly as possible because it helps me reach that bliss point. And I can't stop myself eating a bag. I mean, who can? You'd have to be so hyper vigilant, disciplined not to overeat crisps because they are hyper palatable and designed to keep us overeating. So I just have the simple rule. I don't have them at home. I used to buy them when my kids were home, but now I don't. But when we're out at someone's for dinner and they put a little bowl of crisps there, I'm with maybe other people. There's only one bowl between eight. I will have 3 or 4 and I'll enjoy them. And I can't overeat them because it's not the option there. Unless I say to the host, can you get some more crisps? Which obviously I'm not going to do. But, it's just take those temptations out of your way. And if you're one of those people who say, yeah, but I love crisps. It's my favorite thing, having crisps and wine. Well, that's great. But is it actually, is it really benefiting your health? Is it something that you want to be doing, all the time? Probably not, because again, when I've eaten a bag of crisps, usually a big bag, I don't feel great afterwards. My mouth feels a bit and I just don't feel great. They don't make me feel good. Another thing you can do is you can upgrade your chocolate. Most of us like chocolate, don't we? I mean, I love chocolate. I've always loved chocolate. And I used to be very attached to my dairy milk. But I've upgraded my chocolate now to 70%. And in fact, I've upgraded even further to 85%. And actually, when I have 70% now, I feel it's quite a treat. But it's just, it's just change. It's just progress. It's like, I used to think dairy milk was the best thing since sliced bread. Now, if I occasionally have a piece of it, which, God, I can't remember the last time I did, but, at Christmas or something, I can't even taste chocolate. It just tastes of vegetable fat to me. It doesn't, it's like, and it's so sweet. But of course, I didn't go from dairy milk to 85% chocolate overnight. It's been a long, steady change. So I would just say, start upgrading your chocolate. Start by buying 70%. And if you can buy raw chocolate, even better, because it's got much higher level of antioxidants in it. And yeah, it's not that much more expensive. But yeah, upgrading your chocolate is another really good way of still having processed food, but not maybe ultra processed food. I also try and make my own sweet things. And I do occasionally think, I wish there was a biscuit in the cupboard. I did used to have a really sweet tooth. And I'm really trying to curb that. And my mum had type 2 diabetes, and when I tested my genes, I've kind of got the gene that can, if I was overweight and I eat the wrong things, I'm more likely than you are perhaps to get diabetes. So I'm really on that as well, but I still like sweet things. So I just make my own, and I have this rule. I make my own sweet things. I'll eat a cake if it's homemade and someone's made it and it's, nice ingredients. But if someone gets out a packet cake for me, they know me well enough now. I'll say, no, thank you. I don't want to put that, in my body. And again, I think as you get better at eating more natural foods, you get this natural satiety point. I can be quite disciplined. I didn't used to be able to, but because my blood sugar is more balanced these days, if there's a piece of something that is processed and it's come out of a packet, and I'm only going to eat it because I'm polite or because I'm really hungry, I can actually say no to it now. That wasn't something I used to be able to do. This has been a work in progress, and you can be a work in progress, and you can evolve with your diet. And I think as you eat more natural foods, you really do lose your taste for this ultra processed food. The next thing you can do is to invest in some glass storage for your nuts and your seeds. maybe your dried fruit, and also glass storage for your, roasted vegetables, perhaps, maybe a big salad that you're going to make, any leftovers, and put your leftovers in glass storage in the fridge. And then you open your fridge door and it all looks beautiful, whatever you've got there, in your nice glass boxes, because it's all about making it look good. And that's what the processed food people do. They make it look as good as possible with their beautiful packaging. It just tempts us, doesn't it? Like most of the supermarket is full of processed food. It's like the edges of the supermarket that have the vegetables and the fish and the meat, and it's the inner part and all those aisles that have all the shiny wrappers. And that's what makes up most of the supermarket. So, that's what we buy most of. But we can overcome that by making our own food look really good. And also, they've done some studies where they've shown that crunchy food gets us chewing more. And when we chew more, we get more satiety. We get that message that we're fuller sooner. And again, a lot of bliss foods, we don't have to chew them very much. We can just chomp, 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 swallow, chomp, 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 swallow. Whereas real food, you really have to chew it for quite a long time. And of course, the meal lasts much longer. And you get that message to the brain that you are full. So that is a lot of information and a lot of do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. But just start, and I always think whenever you're trying to change anything in life, it's never done overnight. And when I've done something, I allow myself free passes. I still allow myself free passes. And I'm not beyond, eating a small box of Bouger in a night. I don't know if you've heard of Bouger. They are absolutely delicious chocolates. But, we can all do it. And I'm not saying I'll never eat another crisp. Of course I will. And I allow myself free passes, but I make it as hard for myself as I possibly can so that I'm not doing that on a daily or weekly basis. And it really pays off, because when you eat really bright, colourful foods, you feel really bright and colourful and energised. And you just can't expect to feel that if you're eating lots of beige processed food. So that's my little bit on processed food. The second thing I want to talk about in this podcast is thinking about the gut. I mentioned the gut at the beginning, but a lot of people think that food is the only thing that affects your gut. And I just want to dispel that myth, because there are so many other things that affect our gut health. It can be medications that we take. And if you're a woman and you've started taking HRT, I see a lot of women that struggle a bit with progesterone, and that can affect their gut. They start getting more bloating and they blame their diet, but actually it's the medication. Maybe that particular progesterone doesn't agree with them. So, or some other medication that you might be taking, but medications can really affect the gut. The thyroid gland also has a big impact on the gut. And sometimes when I'm seeing clients and they'll come to me and they'll say they're tired, they don't feel like they're digesting food very well, they're suffering with bloating and gas. And sometimes we'll get their thyroid tested. And this is very common in women over 40, that we suddenly get thyroid issues. And for most of us, it's low thyroid function. And it can be easily remedied. So, if you're someone who's having issues with your gut, you might want to get your thyroid tested, and you can usually easily ask your GP to do that for you. We also know that hormones can affect our gut health, and that can be in perimenopause when they're fluctuating, or postmenopause when we just don't have the same level of hormones. Alcohol is another one that affects our gut. And if you've been out in the razzle, a lot of people will say to me the next day, they have a lot, their bowels are much more loose than they normally are. But of course, over time, alcohol can really affect the gut. If you think of alcohol, we would use that, to clean wounds, to get rid of bacteria. Well, of course, when you're drinking a lot of alcohol, or you're drinking alcohol regularly, it can affect your gut lining. It can slough off some of the good bacteria. So really think about, how much alcohol you're having and if that could be affecting your gut. Stress is a massive one. When we're stressed, we don't get as much blood flow to our digestive organs, and therefore we don't, absorb and digest that food as well. And then that can cause all sorts of problems. We can start getting stomach pain, bloating, because the food just isn't being digested as optimally as it can. And another thing that can affect the gut is poor sleep. If you are someone that doesn't sleep very well, or you found, since midlife, being in your 40s and your hormones start to decline, sleep can become an issue. And that might be one of the reasons why, you've suddenly started having some gut issues. And then I also see this quite a lot. People that drink a lot of water with their food. They've got the message that it's a really good idea to drink, a couple of litres of water a day, which, for most people, 1.5, 2 litres of water or, herbal teas is great. However, if you're drinking a lot of that with your food, it can really interfere with digestion because, it's just making that food more dilute. And therefore it's harder for the stomach acid, the digestive enzymes to get to work on it. So if that's you, try not to drink quite as much when you're eating. A glass or two is fine, but not like, a pint or two. So there are lots of things that can affect the gut. And we know that there are trillions of microbes in our gut, and they are as unique as our fingerprint. And again, this is something in 2025 that we are learning so much more, and we've still got so much to learn. But, the microbes in our gut, they need to be in a really good balance. The lining of our gut, we've got this like mucus lining. We want that to be reasonable thickness and robust, so that we can, absorb food and we don't get stomach pain and everything's working as well as it can. So just remember that gut bugs hate stress. They don't like alcohol. They don't like late night eating. Actually, late night eating. And again, if you're a listener to this podcast, you'll know that I advocate having at least a 12-hour sort of fast overnight. So, maybe dinner at 8 and then you're not having a breakfast till 8 a.m. the next day, because then our guts can really recover. And those gut bugs really kind of get restored and rejuvenated if they have that fasting. Whereas if you're continuously eating, they don't get that chance. We know that preservatives and emulsifiers and artificial sweeteners that we find in processed foods, they all do a real number on our gut. And the other thing the gut hates is like the blood sugar roller coaster. When your blood sugar's going up really high because maybe you've, had a big bowl of cereal and then you've gone 2 or 3 hours and you're really, really hungry again. And then you have something else that maybe is quite carby and up goes your blood sugar. And you're on this roller coaster up and down all day. You're probably going to have a horrible mood, but you're probably going to have a really uncomfortable gut as well if you do that. So, blood sugar is key. And we know that, our immunity, and I talked about this in the beginning, that we want to have a nice, stable immune system. And 70 to 80% of our immunity is located in the gut. And the gut, basically, the gut lining is like, we call this epithelial cells, which are just these sort of one cell thick. And that is basically what separates the bloodstream from the gut. And, we want some things from the gut to get into the bloodstream, like when foods have been broken down, like protein into amino acids, we want it to pass through this barrier into our bloodstream so it can go and build up some more kidney or some eye or whatever it might be, the building blocks to keep us going and build our bone and our muscle and all the things that we need protein for. But we want to keep out the bad stuff, and that's what the immunity does on that lining. So it's kind of sampling all the time what is there. So if you've got a really unhappy gut, you can see why suddenly your immunity is not so robust anymore, or it's maybe triggered. And then if it's triggered too often, that's when you can end up with an autoimmune condition, which is, very common these days. So gut is all important, and we really want to take care of ours. So how can you take care of yours? Well, you can take probiotics. Sometimes we need them. We can have prebiotics. We can eat a diverse amount of plant foods. We often talk about 30 different plant foods a week, which can seem incredibly overwhelming, but it's actually really easy once you start eating more natural foods. And when they say 30 different plant foods, that can be anything from vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, things like turmeric, chili, paprika. You can easily get, 7, 8, 9, 10 in one meal. It's just a little bit of thought. And it doesn't have to be 30 different ones every week, but, just try and get that sort of variation. We know in the UK that most people don't get enough fibre. You really want about 25 grams to 30 grams of fibre a day. And you'll get that easily if you're eating a natural diet. But, again, with these processed foods, we're not getting enough of those good fibres. And we also want to, take care of our guts by not getting overly stressed and not drinking too much alcohol. So let's talk a little bit about probiotics. So probiotics are live bacteria. You find them in things like kimchi, kefir, kombucha, any kind of fermented vegetables, miso, live yogurts, things that we just want to have in the fridge. And I find it really helpful. On my top shelf, I always have some sauerkraut. And even if I have a day where I think, I haven't had many vegetables for lunch or something, I'll just have a couple of spoonfuls of sauerkraut with whatever I'm eating. And I know I'm doing myself some good. Kefir is a really nice sort of live kind of yogurt drink with lots of probiotics. And what these probiotics do, they're kind of like, they don't go in the gut and stay in the gut, but they kind of like help us fertilize the gut. So the bugs that we have got there, it helps them grow up. But you really want to be having some probiotics in your diet every day if you can, and just get them in the fridge. I mean, you might not like sauerkraut, but there are some really lovely ones now. I mean, I'd just say try them. Make sure you get them from the fridge. If they're on the shelf and they're not refrigerated, they've been pasteurized and all the bugs have been obliterated. But you want to buy them in the fridge section. And often in a deli, you will find that. And if you don't like sauerkraut, maybe try kimchi, which again is like, fermented vegetables, but it's really, really spicy. And that can be really good with chilies and curries. And you don't have to have loads of it. Like even a teaspoon to start with is enough. And then, maybe over a week build up to 2. And, I don't eat it every day, but I eat it most days. And I don't beat myself up when I don't, but it's there. And when I open my fridge, that's what I can see, and it reminds me to put it on my plate. And then we want to think about things like prebiotic. Now, prebiotic is basically it's a non-digestible fiber. So basically, when we eat it, it doesn't get digested. It's too fibrous. We can't break it down. So you find it in things like vegetables. You find it in chickpeas and oats, onions, garlic, beans, artichokes, leeks. So, it's not like far out foods. It's just sort of everyday foods. And these prebiotics, they really help us make, short chain fatty acids. And these short chain fatty acids that we make in the gut are really good for our immunity. They're really good for making the lining of our gut really giving it some integrity. And when I was talking about, things that get past that sort of gut barrier and get into our bloodstream, we want that lining to be as good as it can be and only allow things through that should go through. And these short chain fatty acids are really good energy for our colon cells. So we want that lining to be really, really healthy. And when you think about the lining of our gut, this, epithelial lining, this one cell thick lining, that basically replenishes itself every few days. I think it's like every 4 days. So, what you're eating today is really going to impact how you feel quite quickly. So I think that's quite incentivizing when you know that these foods are really going to impact your gut integrity quite quickly. Another reason why, you might think that you might know that you're fiber deficient is if you're constipated. Again, I think that's so many people I see have issues with constipation, and we want that bowel regularity. You want to be having a bowel movement. I reckon at least a day. I mean, I know a lot of doctors will say, well, as long as you're having one every 3 to 4 days, but the people that I've worked with over the years, most people feel really good if they're having a bowel movement at least once a day. And that should just happen quite naturally, and easily when you have a really good diet and, if you haven't got IBS or any other sort of underlying reason. We also don't want to be fiber deficient because we know, even 1 teaspoon of fiber lowers your risks, I think something like by 30 or 40% of all the major diseases. So, oh my God, it's so easy. Just add some fiber into your diet and you're going to be healthier. We also know that fiber lowers your low density lipoprotein cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. That's what we call the bad cholesterol. Very simplified term, but it's has its uses. But we don't want high LDL. That's the stuff that's likely to get oxidized in our arteries, get inflamed, cause these plaques, and then suddenly, we can have a heart attack or a stroke. So we want to keep our LDL, one of our risk factors for heart disease and stroke, as low as we possibly can. Well, when I say as low as possibly can, I mean sort of under 3 is the current sort of current thinking. We, like I said, beans, oat, flaxseed, these are all really good things that are, easy ways of getting fiber into your diet, and they're going to encourage really lovely gut bug diversity. And again, we know that people that have more diversity, like lots of different families of gut bugs in their gut, are more likely to have less disease. So we want that diversity. And I've talked about blood sugar balance, if it's all over the place, can influence our weight, can influence our gut bugs. And also fibre makes us feel full. And, you've got lots of chewing going on, lots of diversity with the gut bugs. So, gut bugs can really influence how you gain weight and how you absorb calories. So, actionable steps to improve your gut health. So firstly, up your variety of vegetables and fruit. Learn to love fermented food. Just go into a deli, go into the sort of refrigerated bit and see what you can find. Try some kefir and some live yogurt. Make yourself some salads. Lovely salads with avocado can be a great way of, improving your gut health. And remember to have that sort of 12-hour overnight fast. And there's something called the migrating motor complex. And that basically is the housekeeper of the gut. And that's when those gut bugs, when those gut bugs get replenished and all that good stuff starts happening. And remember to feel good about carbs. A lot of those fibre things that I'm talking about, foods that I'm talking about, they are carbohydrates. But basically, when it comes to feeling good about carbohydrates, you want to ditch the simples, the refined. You want to embrace the complex, those that have lots of fibre. And that can be things like, all the vegetables, root vegetables, chickpeas, beans, pulses, whole grains. That is kind of what we're looking for when we're trying to get, more fibre in our diet. So breakfast could be like leftovers from the night before, a smoothie with some protein in. Smoothies are a great way of getting protein in my mind, especially in the summer. I love a smoothie. Lunch protein, we want protein at lunch, maybe slightly lower carbs at lunch, especially if you're working, because, carbs can make you feel a bit tired. And it's probably better to have your carbs at supper time. Again, you want the protein, but, possibly more carbs when you want to induce that slightly more sleepy feeling. Now, the next thing, you can always ask yourself every day is, have I fed my good gut bugs? And hopefully now you know just how to do that. So let's go on to the third and final point I wanted to make and about eating healthily in 2025, because, we all talk about this sort of eating window. So how big is your eating window? Do you have those 12 hours and why do you want to have them? Now, time restricted eating, TRE, you often see it written as, has a lot of benefits. We know that it benefits our metabolic health. And that just means how your body uses and stores and gets energy. That's metabolism. And it has an impact on our weight, our inflammation, our longevity, our gut health. And, even if you're eating with an eating window and you're snacking in between meals, it still makes such a difference to, your overall health. And I always say, if your eyes are open, it doesn't mean your mouth has to be. So, if you're still watching telly at 9 o'clock, it doesn't mean you still need to be snacking on, crisps and biscuits, heaven forbid. But, we've all done it, haven't we? Like you're sitting and eating mindlessly. But just commit to a time and say, I don't eat over that time. And that will help you extend your eating window. So really, that is all I wanted to talk about for this podcast. So I just want to leave you with 3 actionable things that you can do in the next week or 2. Something to aspire to, some changes that you can make that are going to, impact your long-term health. So number 1 would be start prepping your food, like we talked about. Be prepared. Get some roasted vegetables in the fridge or some steamed broccoli. I like to have my glass bowls of steamed broccoli, maybe some sliced roast beef, some chicken, smoked salmon, a big roasted carrots, whatever it might be, salad ingredients, but I have them in the fridge. And then also think about getting some lovely glass jars, getting your nuts and seeds, lots of variety, make them look really beautiful, maybe a project for the weekend, but get a cupboard where you open the door and you see this sort of abundance of nuts and seeds. And, you're doing to yourself like the processed companies do to us. You're making it look really good and you're more likely to be tempted to eat it. Secondly, try this. Just try having legumes for lunch. So by that, I mean beans, pulses, lentils, kidney beans, that kind of thing. They will just give you the fibre, and they're a really lovely base to a salad. You could just simply open a jar of chickpeas, and to those chickpeas you could add rocket, cress, radish, tomatoes, feta, herbs and spices, whatever you've got, black olives, put a bit of olive oil and lemon juice. It takes minutes to throw together, and you're suddenly getting all those lovely fibrous things in your diet and meeting that need for your gut bugs to be fed and to keep you regular, and all the great things that we know come along with fibre. And thirdly, experiment with that time-restricted eating, that eating window or that restrictive window. But, if you're going to stop eating at 8 p.m. at night, don't have your breakfast at 8 a.m. Whatever it works for you. It might be 7 to 7, 9 to 9, whatever. But just try it. Be conscious of it. Say to yourself, my kitchen closes and I don't eat beyond, 8 o'clock, or whatever time it works for you. So these three takeaways are just: 1, start prepping your food. Eat more pulses. So legumes for lunch is a brilliant one. And you can find lots of recipes on my Instagram and also in the book, and experiment with that 12-hour window. So that about rounds up today's conversation. And I just want to let you know that next time, because I've still got a lot of information on this, like eating healthily in 2025 to share with you. But next time I'm going to be telling you about 4 foods that I think will really elevate your health, and if you can include them weekly. So I'm going to be talking about those 4, what they can do for you and how to include them. I'm going to expand on how to include more variety in your diet. And I'm also going to be talking about why you might want to consider a continued glucose monitor, what that can do for you, and how to go about it. So do join me next time. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you've got any questions, I'm always really happy to hear from you. You can just email me at hello@amandarider.co.uk. You can contact me on my Instagram, or you can just send me a text on the podcast app. It says send text. I hope that was enjoyable to you. I hope you've taken something from there, and that one of those things will inspire you to maybe eat a little better if you're not already. Thanks for your company as always. And until next time. Bye. If you'd like to find out more about my approach, you can find me and lots of my simple, nutritious recipes demonstrated on Instagram at Amanda Rider Nutrition, and that's Rider with a Y. Or you can visit my website, www.amandarider.co.uk. Or if you like a copy of my book, Feel Good for Menopause, you can find that on Amazon. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could follow, or click the subscribe button. It will really help me grow the podcast and keep me going. So thank you. And of course, do get in touch. I'd always love to hear from you. So that leaves me to say I'm sending lots of love and light from my midlife goddess to yours. See you next week. Bye for now.